Well, the New South Wales Premier has gone first. He's guaranteed a public holiday in New South Wales if the Matildas win the World Cup. But will the rest of the country get behind it too? The move has prompted a bit of division, and it invokes this from the 1980s from the then Prime Minister Bob Hawke after Australia won the America's Cup.
Tell you what, any boss who sacks anyone for not turning up today is a bum.
Joining me now is David Littleproud. He's the Nationals leader. What do you think? Are you going to be a bit Bob Hawke or no?
No, I'm Captain Killjoy on this one. I just think, unfortunately, while we're all with the Matildas, and what a night it was on Saturday night. I mean, my wife, who's not into sport, I've seen a side of her I didn't see before ever. It's brought the whole nation together, the whole nation out. And I think we're going to continue to support the Matildas all the way through Wednesday night and then hopefully through to Saturday night. But, someone's got to ultimately pay for this. It's all well and good for premiers and prime ministers to promise public holidays, but ultimately someone foots the bill. And that, in this case, is small business. And if you go back to when the Queen died, Shane Oliver from AMP did analysis and said it cost around $9 billion for that day that we had off then. So ultimately there is a big cost. And when the government's proposing not to have it on the Monday after, but a week later, well, how do we all share in that? And why didn't we have one after the Diamonds one? I mean, our girls rocked the world in netball less than a week ago. And there's no public holiday for them. And I think that's their 12th World Cup. We're all with this, and Matilda Mania has taken off, and I'm all for it. And I got to say, I didn't sleep Saturday night, even though the game was over by 9:30, because my blood pressure was that high. It just coming down. How those girls got through that penalty shootout is just beyond me. That is the ecstasy, but the cruelty of soccer is just laid bare. But the professionalism of these girls, how they just had steel in their veins and just walked up and just kept going and got through. I think what's the longest penalty shootout in our nation's in the world's history of World Cup soccer is just is amazing. Shows how good our girls is. Let's invest money into getting professional women's sport paid what they should be rather than taking a holiday. Is my thoughts.
Yeah, right. Okay, I can pay that. You don't support a public holiday for all the reasons you've outlined. And look, I do kind of think it would be weird a week later, but I don't want to kill this vibe that we're feeling around the country at the moment. But you've raised the issue of funding for women's sport. Have you looked at the figures here when it comes to soccer for women in Australia? Do you have an estimate of how underfunded it is?
Yeah, well, just look at what's been brought in this country for the Women's World Cup. It's about $7 billion has been brought in to the country. About $4.35 billion of that has been from overseas. But I think what this shows is that women's sport is now getting the eyeballs. And this is where administrators, it's not necessarily just government having put money in. I think government's responsibilities at grassroots, making sure families can afford to be able to get their kids into playing sport. It's at the elite end where I think now the administrators of these sports need to make sure that the money isn't just funneled into paying the high wages of the men, but actually they have a real product, a world-leading product that I think administrators need to look at, and I think we all need to look at it and say, well, I think that the cut of the pie, because most of the pie comes from the media rights that they get, the TV rights that they get, is that I think there should be some squaring up of that, and that we shouldn't see, A-League women that are on about $22,000 a year. When this has been a bonanza for much of Australia and much of the soccer in fraternity. So I think the cricket guys have won a World Cup, and now we're finally starting to see the women being able to have a women's IPL. I think professional women's sport, no matter the sport, is evolving, and I think it's not just the sporting fraternity, the broadcasters, but government's roles at grassroots, and I think all the way through. This is a big rethink, and I think the women's cricket, the women's netball, who are all world champions, have laid the foundation stones, and now I think the Matildas have just broken that ceiling, where I think there needs to be a big, hard look at this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure. I wonder if the AFL regrets not giving up the MCG or some of that real estate for this World Cup. I'm sure they don't, but certainly a rival.
Well, I mean, instead of a holiday, I mean that's really what the MCG and AFL should be having a look at. If we make the final next Saturday, why shouldn't we look at trying to pack 110,000 Australians into a stadium, the MCG? We'll pack it. We packed it for the Women's Cricket World Cup, just remember. Why wouldn't we pack it for this? If the Matildas made the grand final, I think there should be serious conversations with the AFL and everyone else and saying this is the biggest spectacle on earth next Saturday, and if Australians are in it, it will just go off. You will never see a bigger sporting event anywhere in the world, and even for soccer. So there's a big challenge, I think, where we should be focusing our energy on rather than public holidays.
All right. Okay. I'm convinced. I'm convinced by your argument. I'll put it that way. Before I let you go, something that has been raised in the Voice debate is welcome to country. Jacinta Price has been the latest to weigh in this morning, saying they've become too much and they're becoming divisive. What do you think?
I think there's a place for it on special occasions, but I think it's probably gone a little too far and it's overuse. And I think that can then you lose its currency. I mean, when you go to business meetings and there's a welcome to country, I think there's an opportunity for it to be used wisely to get to the intent that it was created for. But when it's overused, it loses its currency, and I think that's where the conversation needs to be. But I think that's one that we can maturely have as a nation down the track. But I think the biggest question that Australians face is the referendum that they'll be asked to vote on in the next couple of months. I think that's the main game that people need to be focused on, because changing your constitution is a lot more significant than a ceremonial start to an event.
David Littleproud, thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.